Kason and Dior's
sentencing. I can't believe my own brother bailed our son out of jail back at Springfield and got us arrested. Stan and Kaden are so gonna pay for this.
Yeah. We were only teaching Kaden a lesson for all the trouble he caused. And what do we get for it? Jail time. And pretty soon, a criminal record.
They ain't the only two things you two are gonna get, Kason and Dior Concord. And that's something you're gonna find out for yourselves, because today's your court hearing. Now stand up and come with me. Let's get going.
Fine. Let's just get this over with.
At the courthouse.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Alfred Smith.
You may all be seated. All right. Court is now in session. Kason and Dior Concord. I have called this hearing because there were certain allegations made against you two concerning someone you wanted out of your lives in particular. Prosecutor Henry Maverick, read the charges.
Kason and Dior Concord, you two have been charged for child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault with the use of dangerous weapons.
How do you two plead?
Well, Your Honor, I plead not guilty. Our son Kaden committed a bunch of serious crimes. He doxed Nathaniel's personal information, tried to assault one of his bullies' younger sister, defueled my car, and assaulted Serenity with a baton.
I agree with my husband. Not guilty.
Well, based on the evidence presented to me, what your son did to Serenity could stem from the fact that you two might have assaulted him with the same weapon he used on her. And this could have resulted in him having anger issues due to poor treatment. So, I call upon my first witness, Dakota.
Kason and Dior, I understand your son assaulted my daughter with a baton, but he's been suffering from a bunch of traumatic experiences that he went through since he was a child. Like Trip and Deacon, your son was bullied by Sage, Vincent, Luke, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax. And that went on until he reached 10th grade. And you two didn't seem to care. As for the baton he used to assault Serenity, from what I heard, you two assaulted him with the same sort of weapon. And you even used spiked bats to assault him too. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Dakota. I call upon my next witness, Serenity Jones.
Adding on to what my man just said, when my dad formed a mass assault against Kaden, you two didn't care how badly injured he got the day he got expelled and arrested. All you did was neglect his injuries from that mass assault and throw him away like he was nothing but trash. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Serenity. I call upon my next witness, Wyatt Hightower.
Even though Kaden and the Bloody Knights assaulted my eldest daughter Opal for breaking up with him, Kason and Dior are no better because of the way they treated him. They brutally assaulted him with bats and batons, especially because he was smoking cigarettes at the age of 15 years old. They even neglected his injuries, especially the ones from the mass assault Allen planned against him for what he did to Serenity. Therefore, I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Wyatt. I call upon my next witness, Glo Hightower.
I agree with Wyatt. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Glo. I call upon my next witness, Opal Hightower.
Mr. and Mrs. Concord, I understand Kaden tried to assault Michael Dale's younger sister Indigo, which was one of the reasons why I broke up with him, but I now know why he did that. Aside from Michael being one of Kaden's biggest bullies, you two have brutally assaulted him with the same sort of weapons he used to assault Serenity. You even neglected his injuries from that mass assault her dad planned against him the day he got expelled and arrested. And for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Opal. I call upon my next witness, Octavius Hightower.
I agree with Opal. I find Kaden's parents guilty.
Thank you, Octavius. I call upon my next witness, Finley Hightower.
I'm on the same page as Octavius. I find Kaden's parents guilty.
Thank you, Finley. I call upon my next witness, Moxie Hightower.
Look! Mr. and Mrs. Concord, I know what it's like dealing with a member of Trip's disbanded gang. Nash assaulted me and my sister Cassidy on Black Friday in 2021. But compared to the stuff Kaden did, that's not even serious enough for you two to disown him. And not only that, that you even assaulted him with bats and batons yourselves. And for that, I say you're both guilty.
Thank you, Moxie. I call upon my next witness, Cassidy Hightower.
I agree with Moxie. What he did wasn't as serious as the stuff Nash did, so I say Mr. and Mrs. Concord are guilty.
Thank you, Cassidy. I call upon my next witness, Jet Burton.
Look, Kason and Dior, my wife and I are upset about Kaden and the bloody knights assaulting our son Jonah, all because Opal broke up with him, but we now understand why he did that. Aside from getting bullied by Sage, Vincent, Michael Dale, Dustin Halifax, and Luke Rivera, who apologized to him later on, you two have been abusing him for years. Your own son. You two assaulted him with bats and batons, neglected his injuries, especially from the mass assault planned against him by Alan Jones, and disowned him the day he got expelled. Now this is not how you discipline your son. Because he was smoking cigarettes at 15 years old, you could have sent him to rehab. But instead, you treated him like a punching bag. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Jet. I call upon my next witness, Harp Burton.
I agree with Jet. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Harp. I call upon my next witness, Jonah Burton.
When I saw that apology video made by Sage, Vincent, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax, I began to have a much better understanding of why Kaden and the Bloody Knights assaulted me. Sure, the four boys bullied Kaden alongside Luke Rivera up until his 10th grade year of high school, but Kaden himself has been getting abused by his own parents. Therefore, I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Jonah. I call upon my next witness, Gunnar Burton.
Sure, Kaden assaulted my girlfriend the day he got expelled and arrested. But after when we talked to him and saw that apology video made by 4 of his former bullies, we began to understand why he did that and tried to assault Indigo, Michael's sister. Mr. and Mrs. Concord are no better than Mr. Jones because they assaulted their own son with bats and batons. The latter of which he used to assault Serenity herself. So for abusing him right up to the point where he began to have serious anger issues and suicidal thoughts, I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Gunnar. I call upon my next witness, Maximus Burton.
I agree with Jonah and Gunnar. I find Kaden's parents guilty of child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, Maximus. I call upon my next witness, Calvin Burton.
I'm on the same page as Maximus. I find Kaden's parents guilty.
Thank you, Calvin. I call upon my next witness, Charles Martel.
Look. Kason and Dior, I know what it's like to have a bully for a son. Lily and I were disappointed in our sons for bullying not just your son, but Trip and Deacon too. But what you two did to Kaden didn't teach him a lesson. You assaulted him more times than Curtis and Winter did Trip. And what's worse, you did that while using weapons. You also neglected the injuries he sustained from getting assaulted by Michael Dale and Alan Jones, the latter of whom planned that mass assault against your own son. For that, I say you're both guilty.
Thank you, Charles. I call upon my next witness, Lily Martel.
I agree with Charles. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Lily. I call upon my next witness, Sage Martel.
Okay, I admit that I bullied Kaden up until sophomore year in high school, even gave him a swirly, but Kaden's been through much worse because of the way his parents treated him. No wonder Kaden assaulted Serenity with a baton the day he got expelled and arrested. And since Mr. and Mrs. Concord assaulted their own son with the same sort of weapons he used on her, I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Sage. I call upon my next witness, Vincent Martel.
Even though Sage, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax bullied Kaden more often than Luke and I did, I'd have to agree with him because Mr. and Mrs. Concord are no better than we were. So I find Kaden's parents themselves guilty of child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, Vincent. I call upon my next witness, Landon Dale.
Kason and Dior, you two are worse than Curtis and Winter. You both treated your own son like a punching bag just as much as Dan did Simona. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Landon. I call upon my next witness, Kendra Dale.
I agree with Landon. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Kendra. I call upon my next witness, Michael Dale.
You know, Mr. and Mrs. Concord,
If I had known that you two have been abusing Kaden all this time, I wouldn't have called you about him trying to assault my younger sister. What you two did to your own son was no better than all the trouble he caused or any of the stuff I did to him as a bully up until 10th grade. For that, I say you're both guilty.
Thank you, Michael. I call upon my next witness, Indigo Dale.
Look, Mr. and Mrs. Concord, while I was scared of Kaden because he tried to assault me in front of my brother Mason, I now know why he did that in the first place. Even though our older brother Michael bullied him up until 10th grade, including the time he along with Sage and Dustin gave him a swirly, you two have been abusing him all along. You two treated him so badly that you turned him into the ill-tempered misogynist he never wanted to be in the first place. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Indigo. I call upon my next witness, Mason Dale.
I agree with Indigo. I find Kaden's parents guilty of child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, Mason. I call upon my next witness, Frederick Halifax.
Even though my son Dustin bullied Kaden alongside the Marnell brothers, Michael Dale, and Luke Rivera, Kason and Dior have done much worse. They brutally assaulted their own son with the same sort of weapons that Kaden used to assault Serenity the day he got expelled and arrested. Therefore, I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Frederick. I call upon my next witness, Tracy Halifax.
I agree with Frederick. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Tracy. I call upon my next witness, Dustin Halifax.
I admit that I bullied Kaden up until 10th grade, including the time Sage, Michael Dale, and I gave him a swirly, but Mr. and Mrs. Concord, what you two did to him was no better. You brutally assaulted your own son with the same sort of weapons that he used to brutally assault Serenity the day he got expelled and arrested. You even neglected him when he got injured from not just the mass assault planned out by our former principal, but the time Michael beat him up for trying to hurt his sister Indigo. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Dustin. I call upon my next witness, Dexter Dash.
Kason and Dior, what you two did to your own son was much worse than all the times my nephew and 4 of his friends bullied him prior to 11th grade. And it was no better than the time Alan assaulted him the day he got expelled and arrested for assaulting Serenity. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Dexter. I call upon my next witness, Annabelle Dash.
I agree with Dexter. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Annabelle. I call upon my next witness, Weston Dash.
My cousin does have a point. What Mr. and Mrs. Concord did to their own son was no better than the times he got bullied up until the end of 10th grade. So I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Weston. I call upon my next witness, Mackenzie Dash.
I agree with Weston. I find Kaden's parents guilty of child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I call upon my next witness, Richard Rivera.
Kason and Dior are just as bad as Curtis and Winter. They brutally assaulted Kaden with bats and batons and neglected the injuries he got from the mass assault planned by Alan. Therefore, I say they are guilty.
Thank you, Richard. I call upon my next witness, Ariana Rivera.
I agree with Richard. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Ariana. I call upon my next witness, Luke Rivera.
When I first apologized to Kaden, I had no idea that his parents have been abusing him this whole time. No wonder he couldn't forgive me the first moment I tried to bury the hatchet with him. He's been having trust issues because of his parents. Therefore, I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Luke. I call upon my next witness, CJ Rivera.
I agree with Luke. I find Kaden's parents guilty of Creo abuse, Creo neglect, Creo abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, CJ. I call upon my next witness, Bennett Carter.
Kason and I are bad parents. They've been assaulting their son Kaden for years, even for smoking cigarettes at the age of 15. All this time he could have been sent to rehab, but instead, they've been treating him like a punching bag and they threw him away like he was a piece of junk. Therefore, I say they are guilty.
Thank you, Bennett. I call upon my next witness, Ava Carter.
I agree with Bennett. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Ava. I call upon my next witness, Neville Carter.
First Trip's parents and now Kaden's? Crikey. It's like Victoria's boyfriend and his friends have been duped by a whole mess of child abusers. Mr. and Mrs. Concord, what you two did to Kaden was totally uncalled for. For all the abuse you put him through, I say you're both guilty.
Thank you, Neville. I call upon my next witness, Victoria Carter.
You know, Mr. and Mrs. Concord, when Luke and I saw that video Sage and Vincent made where they apologized to everyone who got involved in this mass assault nonsense, we were all shocked to learn about all the stuff you did to Kaden back at Springfield up to the day he got expelled and arrested for assaulting Serenity. You two have been abusing him all along. You assaulted him just as much as Mr. and Mrs. Wilson did their own son Trip. And you disowned him without even getting him some help. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Victoria. I call upon my next witness, Dismal Gavin.
Compared to how I was in Bradley Animation's 2K6's channel, Kason and Dior are no better because they've been physically abusing Kaden as often as my ex-wife did Stephanie. Therefore, I say they are guilty.
Thank you, Dismal. I call upon my next witness, Eric Gavin.
Mr. and Mrs. Concord, what you two did to Kaden was unforgivable. You treated him as much of a punching bag as my mom did me and my younger siblings. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Eric. I call upon my next witness, Stephanie Gavin.
Even though Kaden started a fight with my sister Natalie, his parents are no better than him because they've assaulted him as much as my mom did me and Natalie combined. Therefore, I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Stephanie. I call upon my next witness, Natalie Gavin.
Look, Mr. and Mrs. Concord, I get that Kaden tried to fight me when I was minding my own business during class, but you can't go around assaulting him as a punishment for him. Sure, he assaulted one of Stephanie's friends and tried to assault her ex-boyfriend's younger sister, but none of those things he did are an excuse for you to beat him up. And neither is the fact that we smoked with cigarettes at age 15. You two have gone too far. For all the times you physically abused him and for disowning him the day he got expelled and arrested, I say you're both guilty.
Thank you, Natalie. I call upon my next witness, Terrence Gavin.
I agree with Natalie. I find Kaden's parents guilty.
Thank you, Terrence. I call upon my next witness, Elizabeth Gavin.
I also find Kaden's parents guilty. They're just as bad as Trip's parents and my mom.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I call upon my next witness, Joseph Gavin.
I'm on the same page as my family. I find Kaden's parents guilty of child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, Joseph. I call upon my next witness, George McCall.
Kason and Dior have taken their son's actions out of proportion. Instead of getting him some help, they assaulted him and disowned him for nothing but minor reasons. Therefore, I say they are guilty.
Thank you, George. I call upon my next witness, Sonia McCall.
I agree with George. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Sonia. I call upon my next witness, Lucy McCall.
Look! Mr. and Mrs. Concord, I understand Kaden assaulted Serenity and tried to assault Indigo, but that doesn't mean you have to assault and disown him. You've gone too far. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Lucy. I call upon my next witness, Cooper.
Look, Kason and Dior, I understand Kaden doxed my son's personal information and sent him a Sonic.exe game, but neither of you are any better because of the way you treated him. You treated him like a punching bag by assaulting him numerous times with bats and batons, neglected all of his injuries from all the times he got beaten up in general. And worst of all, you disowned him the day he got expelled and arrested for assaulting the principal's daughter with the same sort of weapons you two used to punish him. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Cooper. I call upon my next witness, Ruth.
I agree with Cooper. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Ruth. I call upon my next witness, Nathaniel.
Look, Mr. and Mrs. Concord, I get that Kaden doxed my personal information and sent me a Sonic.exe game, but what you two did to him was no better. From what he told me, you two have been treating him like a punching bag for years. You assaulted him more times than my former principal did. That's as much times as the amount of times he got assaulted by his former bullies. For all the stuff you did to him up to the point where you disowned him the day he got expelled and arrested for assaulting Serenity, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Nathaniel. I call upon my next witness, Connor Langston.
Kason and Dior are the biggest jerks to Kaden that I've ever seen. They've been treating him like a punching bag just as much as his former bullies used to. Therefore, I say they're guilty.
Thank you, Connor. I call upon my next witness, Johanna Langston.
I agree with Connor. I say Kason and Dior are guilty.
Thank you, Johanna. I call upon my next witness, Catherine Langston.
Look! Mr. and Mrs. Concord, I know what it's like to get assaulted by someone who was a member of Trip's disbanded gang. Before I found out the truth about Samantha's former father, she assaulted me the day she got expelled and arrested. But her mother didn't agree with him disowning her that day. Sure, Kaden assaulted Serenity the day he got expelled and arrested, but what you two did to him was no better. Not only did you disown him that day, you assaulted him too. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Catherine. I call upon my next witness, Nolan Morris.
Nolan? You're testifying against us?
After when you and Nyla disowned Nash. Why?
Look, Kason and Dyer, it's true that Nyla and I disowned Nash, but we only did that because he looked up explicit content at the school hallways. That was serious enough for us to give him that sort of punishment. Even the belt beating we gave him wasn't enough to teach him a lesson for causing trouble up to that point.
Wait a minute. Nolan, you and Nyla gave Nash a belt beating. Why would you two do that?
Because Nash and Osiris sabotaged Stephanie's date with her ex-boyfriend Michael Dale 2 years ago on Valentine's Day. And before that, Nash assaulted Moxie and Cassidy on Black Friday.
Nolan, I know this is irrelevant, but don't you think you and Nyla could get backlash over the way you treated Nash, and the thing he did to get expelled and arrested?
Technically, Nyla and I did get backlash at our respective workplaces, but not because of the way we treated Nash. It's because everyone saw him as a child predator. Unfortunately, disowning him wasn't enough for us to avoid that. But as for you, Kason and Dyer, compared to the stuff Nash did, what Kaden did wasn't serious enough for you two to disown him. For that, I say you're guilty.
Well, since you already got backlash due to your son becoming a child predator, I'll just let you off the hook for the time being. Anyways, I call upon my next witness, Nyla Morris.
Kason and Dior, even though Kaden tried to assault the younger sister of one of his former bullies like Nash did to Opal's younger sisters, I have to agree with Nolan on this one. Kaden never did any of the stuff Nash did. So it wasn't serious enough for you two to disown the former. And to add further insult, you've assaulted him numerous times for years. For all the stuff you did to your own son, I say you're both guilty.
I appreciate your testimony, Nyla. But before I continue with this trial, because I heard your son escaped from jail at Springfield, I need to give you one little piece of advice. If you and Nolan see your son anywhere in Rapper City, I would advise you two to contact the authorities immediately.
Nolan and I already know what to do because we heard about his escape on the news. So we'll definitely turn him in.
Okay then. I call upon my next witness, Victor Jenkins.
The Bloody Knights and I have evidence against Kaden's parents concerning all the abuse they put him through over the years. These right here are the batons that they used to brutally assault him during his high school years. And coincidentally, those were the sort of weapons Kaden used to assault Serenity the day he got expelled and arrested. So with the evidence in mind, I say Mr. and Mrs. Concord are guilty.
Thank you, Victor. I call upon my next witness, Vince Jones.
Aside from the batons Mr. and Mr. Concord used to assault Kaden, the other piece of evidence we have against them are these spiked bats. And coincidentally, those were the same weapons Kaden gave the Sullivan sisters and the Keating brothers to assault the Everett brothers and the Alinsky sisters. And since those weapons along with the batons were registered under Kaden's parents' names, I say they're guilty.
Oh my goodness. I can't believe this. Are you two out of your minds? How could you physically abuse your own son with those weapons? Have you two gone mad? You put him through so much pain by doing that?
Your Honor, those weapons were meant to discipline our son. He did underage smoking at the age of 15. Everybody knows you're not allowed to smoke until you're an adult.
Yeah, and not only that, but he smoked at school. That's why we beat him up with those weapons.
Kason and Dior, while I do agree with the school's policy against smoking, and that only adults can smoke, assaulting him with those weapons is not an act of discipline. What you did to him was clearly child abuse. You never even thought about taking him to rehab. And since 2 members of the Bloody Knights have shown evidence against you, it's time for me to call the rest of them up. So, I call upon my next witness, Axel.
I agree with Victor and Vince. Based on the evidence we all gathered up, I find Kaden's parents guilty of child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, Axel. I call upon my next 2 witnesses, Sid and Donald Wilson.
My twin brother Donald and I are both on the same page as Axel. I speak for the both of us and the rest of the Bloody Knights when I say I find Kaden's parents guilty as charged.
Yeah. What's it said? Mr. and Mrs. Concord are clearly guilty as charged based on the evidence provided by Victor and Vince.
Thank you, boys. I call upon my next witness, Sean Keller.
Based on the evidence Victor and Vince brought with us, I also find Kaden's parents guilty of child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, Sean. I call upon my next witness, Jacqueline Anders.
So do I. According to the evidence Victor and Vince presented for us, I find Kaden's parents guilty of child abuse, child neglect, child abandonment, and aggravated assault.
Thank you, Jack. I call upon my next 2 witnesses, Crowtoon Productions Incorporated and Crow Girl 22.
Kason and Dior, you two should be ashamed of yourselves. You brutally assaulted your own son with the same weapons he used to assault Serenity before he got expelled and arrested.
Yeah, smoking may be dangerous and unhealthy, and Kaden shouldn't be doing that at school, not even until he's an adult either, but what you two did was no better. You nearly beat him to death.
Yeah! And for that, neglecting his injuries, disowning him the day he got expelled and arrested, and refusing to take him to rehab. I speak for myself and Crowgirl 22 when I say you're both guilty.
Thank you, Crowtoon Productions Incorporated and Crow Girl 22. I call upon my next witness, Master DC King 2009.
Well. Look who finally got arrested. Kason and Dior conquered, the 2 parents who caused their own son so much pain.
Master DC King 2009. We should have known you had something to do with this.
Oh, I did. Anyway, Your Honor, Kason and Dior are such bad parents. When Kaden was 15 years old, he started smoking with cigarettes as a way of coping with the trauma he suffered from all the times he got bullied and assaulted at school. Up until 10th grade, he got bullied by Sage and Vincent Martel, Luke Rivera, Michael Dale, and Austin Halifax for being lame, getting low grades at school, and not having friends. And worst of all, Sage, Michael, and Austin gave Kaden a swirly and threw him down the stairs near the end of 10th grade, which resulted in Kaden breaking his arm. As for Kason and Dior, when they found out about him smoking, they never took him to rehab. Instead, they used bats and batons to brutally assault him and left him severely injured. They even neglected all the injuries he got from getting assaulted by Michael Dale for trying to assault his younger sister Indigo and by Alan Jones for assaulting Serenity. So instead of taking him to a hospital to treat his injuries, when he got expelled and arrested for assaulting Serenity, they went ahead and disowned him. Their own son. Because Kason and Dior never did anything to support him, Kaden was left all alone without any help to cope with his trauma. And he's been suffering from PTSD and feeling suicidal. Therefore, I say they're guilty.
Oh dear. I knew Kaden was feeling suicidal when he testified against Alan Jones, but I can't believe his own parents never cared for him at all. Kason and Dior conquered. You two are so selfish. Your own son has been broken, depressed, and all alone, and you never did anything to help him. You were never there for him at all. and Dyer, there's a few people here who would like to have a word with you. Starting with your brother, Stan Smith.
Stan, don't you dare testify against us, mister. I'm your sister.
Sorry, Dior, but you and Kason leave me no choice. Because you two have ruined your own son's life. You assaulted him, neglected him, and abandoned him. You even disregarded all the times he got bullied by Sage, Vincent, Luke, Michael Gale, and Dustin Halifax, even though Luke tried to bury the hatchet with him. For that, I say you're guilty. Both of you.
Thank you, Stan. I call upon my next witness, Jessica Smith Andrea.
I agree with Stan. Kason and Dior, what you two did to Kaden was unforgivable. You two remind me of my ex-husband. For all the stuff you did, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Jessica. I call upon my next witness, Samuel Smith Andrea.
So you two must be my step-aunt and step-uncle, huh? Gotta say, you two remind me of my former dad. He used to abuse me all the time before he got arrested. And you two have abused my step-cousin in a similar way compared to the way my dad did me. For all the stuff you did, I say you're both guilty.
Thank you, Samuel. I call upon my next witness, Adriana Smith Andrea.
I agree with Samuel. I say our step-aunt and step-uncle are guilty for everything they did to our step-cousin.
Thank you, Adriana. I call upon my next witness, Michael Daniel Smith.
Uncle Kason and Aunt Dior, are you two crazy? Beating my cousin up for underage smoking and trying to assault Michael Dale's younger sister out of anger? Disowning him the day he got expelled and arrested for assaulting Serenity at the school hallways? You two remind me of my late mom. She used to abuse me all the time until the day she died and bribed the judge into giving her full custody of me when my dad tried to file her for a divorce because of that. For all the abuse you put my cousin through back at Springfield, I say you're both guilty.
Thank you, Michael. I call upon my next witness, Jonathan Smith.
I agree with my half-brother Michael. I find my half-aunt and half-uncle guilty for everything they did to my half-cousin.
Thank you, Jonathan. I call upon my next witness, Sally D'Andrea.
Sally D'Andrea? But that's...
That's right, Dior. I'm Jessica's sister.
How can this be? I thought you were dead.
I was. Until I got revived. And I'm very disappointed in you and Kason. You two remind me of my ex-husband, Dimitri. You two assaulted Kaden just as much as my ex did Amy and Julie. Even though Dimitri abused my daughter Julie the same way Pierre Webster did his daughter Samantha and are both worse than you two, I say you're guilty for abusing Kaden.
What? Sally, are you saying that your ex-husband molested your daughter Julie, abused both her and her sister Amy, and killed you?
In our former creator Psychromeo07 account, yes.
Oh dear. That must have been really devastating. May I call Amy and Julie Conroy up to the stand, please? Amy and Julie, is everything your mother said about your father true?
Yes, it is, Your Honor. Every word of it.
And because of all the abuse our dad put us through, the fact he murdered our mom before she got revived, and the amount of time he spent killing innocent women, he got executed. Overall, our dad's done much worse in Albany, New York than all the abuse our step-aunt Dior and step-uncle Kason put our step-cousin Kaden through.
Speaking of which, I speak for myself and my sister Julie when I say Kason and Dior are guilty for everything they did to our step-cousin Kaden.
My word. Your father really is worse than your step-cousin's parents. You poor girls. I feel really bad for you two. Neither of you deserve to get treated like that. As for you, Kason and Dyer, while you should consider yourselves lucky that you didn't do the sort of thing Dmitri did to his own daughters, that doesn't mean you're off the hook. There's only one person left who is willing to testify against you. And that person is the main victim of the crime, Kaden Concord.
Kaden, don't you dare testify against us, young man. Too bad, old man. You and my mom brought this on yourselves. If you two hadn't been brutally attacking me with the same sort of weapons I used to assault Serenity, none of this would have happened. You didn't care how badly hurt I really was. You never even listened to me whenever I tried to tell you about all the times I got bullied by Sage, Vincent, Luke, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax. You never loved me at all. I hate you two so much.
For everything you've done to me up to the point where you disowned me the day I got expelled and arrested back at Springfield, I say you're both guilty. I never wanna see you two again, you big jerks.
Thank you, Kaden. As for you, Kason and Dyer, according to all witnesses' stories, I hereby find you two guilty as charged. Therefore, I hereby sentence the both of you to 85 years each in prison. In addition to that, you will lose full custody of Kaden and he'll continue to live with his uncle and step-aunt until he's ready to live independently. Officers Reddick and McShane, take them away.
Alright, Kason and Dior Concord, this is your cell. You'll be staying in here for the next 85 years. Don't even think about escaping.
Great. I can't believe we got sentenced to spend 85 years in prison.
Yeah. And what's worse, we've been betrayed by not just my brother, but two of my stepsisters-in-law and the Conroy sisters. Kaden, Stan, Master DC King 2009, and Crowtoon Productions Incorporated. This is all your faults.
Hey! It ain't our faults that Kaden's mental health got scrambled. You two didn't even help him cope with his problems.
Oh yeah? Well, when we get out of here, we'll make him regret ever putting us behind bars in the first place.
Yeah. What she said.
Fat chance child beaters. Elsewhere.
So, my parents think they're better than the parents of my former friends? The so-called friends who abandoned me when I was in prison back at Springfield. Well, when I see them, I'll prove to them how wrong they really are. Hear that, Mom and Dad? When the time comes, you're gonna suffer for everything you've done to me. And I'm gonna enjoy it.